A flow within Power Automate Desktop can actually consist of one or many subflows. Those subflows can call each other. In the past, you had to be able to define a global variable in order to pass them around. But with the latest edition of Power Automate Desktop, subflows now accept input parameters and actually return output parameters. So your functionality can actually be contained within individual subflows. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can use one of those in an example. So let's learn. So what I have here is a standard customer search form HTML page using Edge. In it, what it's going to do is it's going to accept a client number, and when I press the search button, it'll actually return results for that particular customer. And I'll give you an example here. If I type in 1001 for a client number, hit search, it's going to return a customer profile page, just a sample page that has 4 pieces of information. Client number, first name, last name, and then address. And what I want to do is I want to be able to create a Power Automate flow that does this and then returns these 3 pieces of information: the first name, the last name, and then the address. Pretty simple enough to do. I've already got a flow set up, and I'll walk you through that flow to show you how it works. All right, so here's the flow that I've created. Very simple flow. It contains 2 subflows: the main subflow, and then I have another subflow here called perform customer search. Now the main subflow, what it's doing is I'm setting a variable. I'm setting a variable for called client number, and I'm setting it to an initial value of 1001. The next step in action number 2 is it's actually going to call and run the subflow called perform customer search. Now that particular subflow is the subflow that does the bulk of the work, and I'll show you that in a second. But what I want to point out is that traditionally, to be able to pass variables between subflows, you'd have to actually define them here. And these are what they call global variables. So you can define them anywhere within your flow in any one of your subflows, but they can be changed. And I'll explain why that could be a problem in this example. But for now, the main flow, what it does is it sets a variable called client number and then calls the subflow called perform customer search. Now let me show you what the perform customer search subflow does. Now there's 3 things that the perform customer search subflow does. First of all, it opens up the customer search page. So if I open up, I've got to split up into regions a little bit more readable. But in this region, it has 2 actions. I've specified a URL that goes to my static web page that I have for my example here. And then it launches a new edition or a new browser object, creates a new Microsoft Edge browser, passes in that URL. Straightforward enough. It just opens up our web browser and goes to that URL. And I've got a sample of it right here off to the side here. So that's initially what it would do, is just initially bring up the web page to the customer search page. Now in the next section, if it says perform the customer search, it has 2 actions. The first action is it's going to populate the text field. That's this enter client number. So it's going to populate with the client number that's been defined within the main subflow right here, client number 1001. So it's going to populate that field in here, 1001, just like that. And then in action number 7, it actually presses the search button. And essentially it would do this. It would press the search button, it would wait, and then it's going to display a customer profile page. And that's where the third part of this subflow handles the information that's in there. Right, take a look at this, and it's simply 3 actions, and it's collecting or capturing the information that's on that web page. It's capturing the first name, it's capturing the last name, and it's capturing the address, and it's setting those as variables. And then the final action here, step number 14, is it closes down the browser. So essentially, open the browser, enter a client number, performs the search, waits for the information to come back, and then collects that information. So let me just show you what it looks like in real time when it runs. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to hit the run, and let's watch what happens. Okay, so it completed the task. So for client number 1001, it displayed the web page, and it returned variables called first name, last name, and the address, and you can see that it returned the information that was on that web page. So far, so good. Now, this is a standard way to be able to say, okay, I want to take all of the logic to perform a specific function, which is to perform a client search and have it return variables back, which is great. Now, however, with Power Automate, what you can do is you can actually have it so that those variables are encapsulated. In other words, you can pass information, and anything that happens to those variables can happen specifically within that subflow, which is very important because the fact that we're dealing with global variables, there might be some situations where the variable that you're passing in might not be the variable that you expect because it can be changed by any of the other subflows within your flow. And if I go back to my example here on the main, I have a single variable called client number called 1001. Now this is a very, very simple flow, obviously. But in some flows, there could be situations where I might not, because of maybe some logic errors or something else, I might have updated or changed that client number to something else before it actually calls the function to perform a customer search. Now, in order to prevent that, what it would be nice is to be able to have an ability to call a subflow and then pass and have that subflow prompt for input variable. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And watch this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a new subflow. So click on the drop down here and I say new subflow. Now there's a new option available to us. First of all, the subflow name is exactly the way it was before. That hasn't changed. I'm going to call this perform customer search. And because I've already got one that's called that, it's complaining. So I'm going to just call it function. Now, the scope is now different. This is a new input. This is a new option that's available to us. Global would just create a normal subflow as we've been able to do it all along. But now we have a new type of subflow that we can create, and it's local. So that's how we're, by specifying as local, that the subflow that I'm about to create here called perform customer search function will now have variables that are scoped locally only to that subflow. Now when I click save, it'll look like any other subflow, except now it'll actually have the word local underneath the name, perform customer search function. Okay. So now what I want to do is I basically essentially want to take all the logic that I've created already in this subflow and then move it over to my new subflow. So I'm going to highlight the first action, scroll down, and cut. And paste. All right. So now I don't need this subflow anymore, so I'm going to delete the subflow. Now so there's going to be a few errors here. All right. So now I go back here. So I'm going to maximize this, make it a little bit larger. Okay. So right away, what it's doing is it's saying, hey, I need a variable. There isn't a variable called client number. It doesn't exist yet. Okay. So that's because I haven't defined it yet. Okay. So I've said that there's a variable over here and it's complaining because this one doesn't exist either. So what I want to do is I need to define an input variable for this subflow called client number. So you'll notice now on the variables section of the Power Automate within Designer here, you have global variables and now you have local variables. So right now I haven't defined, this is this section here where it says input, I can now define input variables for this subflow. So what I want to do is I want to have this subflow accept a client number variable. So I can say the plus sign and say this is an input parameter. And then I say client number. Okay. Now that I've been defined a variable called client number, this statement now works because it's saying, hey, now you define a client number variable. So it's happy. It's able to populate the information that I need to be able to perform all these other actions. Now at the very bottom here, this is where I'm capturing the information off the web page, where I'm getting the first name, last name, and address. I want to have it so that this subflow will now return these three variables back to whatever subflow I have within here that's going to call it. So what I want to do is I want to define 3 output variables called first name, last name, and address. So go again back to the variables. I'm in my local view, and I'll say, hit the plus sign and say I want to define a output variable. And the first variable that I want to call is first name. So I define first name and hit save. And now what's going to say, hey, I noticed that you've already got a variable that's within the scope of this particular subflow called first name, and you're changing it to an output variable. And it's going to merge those two variables together so that there's just one single variable that's been defined. So hit continue. And now you'll see that there's a first name output. It's no longer within the scope of the subflow anymore, but it is an output variable. So I'll do the same thing for last name. It'll come back with the same variable name already in use. Do you want to combine these two? And said, yep. And then do the same thing for the third one for the address. Output. Continue. Okay. So kind of a recap, this particular subflow called perform customer service function now accepts an input variable called client number, and now it's going to return 3 variables. One's called address, first name, and last name. And then below it, you'll see under subflow, it identifies that there's a couple more variables that have been defined within just the scope within this particular subflow. And that is the URL and the browser object that gets created here as well. Those are only within the context of this subflow. Those variables are not, they do not have no visibility to any other subflows within this flow, just within this particular subflow. Now that I've created this new subflow that takes parameters and returns parameters, I now go back to my main. And now what I want to do is, because now it's saying, hey, there isn't a subflow called perform customer search anymore because I deleted it. So now if I go back there and I click on it to edit it, now I'm going to specify my new function or new subflow that I created, perform customer search. And now what it does is, because it knows that it's a local or it's a locally scoped subflow, it now says, well, in order to be able to call this particular subflow now, you have to give it a client number. And then in return, what it's going to do is it's going to produce 3 variables, first name, last name, and address. So for client number, what I'm going to do is, because I've already got it scoped out here at this level, client number. So I can say client number. Client number, and hit save. The error will go away. And now what you'll notice is that on the flow variables that are available now at the main level, and because main is not, it's a globally defined subflow, it only has visibility to the 4 parameters. It's got the client number, which it defined, client number here, and then it's got 3 additional parameters that are being returned from this subflow. So now when I run it, and now it's complete. Now, from the visibility of the main subflow that's here, it passed in the client number 1001 and it returned the address, first name, last name. Just these are the only visible variables that are available to the main subflow, are these 4 within the perform customer search function subflow. Basically has the same variables, but these are scoped only locally to it's within the confines of this subflow. And even the browser and the URL, those are local to this particular subflow. These browser and URL variables are not visible to the main subflow, as you can see here. So to recap, with this tutorial, I'm now showing you how you can actually use subflows in a unique way. You can actually encapsulate all of the logic within a subflow and actually treat it almost like a function where it actually accepts input parameters and returns output parameters. Thanks for watching.